I'm gonna let everyone in now.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hi, everyone. Welcome.
Welcome.
Yay. We'll get started here in a minute. We've got to let everybody in.
Yep, we've still got people joining.
This is our 29th Tutorial Tuesday. Hard to imagine that we've done that many.
I know, there have been so many.
Crazy. But this month is really fun. This is our, the whole month we're doing socks. So, you know, for October, Socktober things.
Still got more people coming in, so.
Okay, I'll wait a little bit before I really start talking then. I'm just jabbering away.
No, you're good. I was like, I'm still letting people in. Okay.
All right, open your chats and let us know where you're from too, if you feel like it. I'm here in Austin now, Texas. So we are getting started. This is the 29th Tutorial Tuesday that we've done. And this month is all socks. So we're going to cover all parts of the sock. Tonight, I'm going to talk a little bit about like the anatomy of a sock, and then I'm going to show you how to cast on a bunch of different ways. Not the actual cast on, but just how to get started if you want to knit socks in the round. Well, most socks, I guess, are knit in the round, but there's a couple that aren't. So knitting socks on 2 at a time is one I'm going to cover, or on double points or magic loop. So we're going to cover all of that kind of thing. And Laura's also here with me again to help out. So if you have questions, post them in the chat. Hi, Laura.
I see we've got San Antonio, Texas, Toronto, Ontario, Cambridge, Ontario, California, Brooklyn. We had a bunch more. Carson City, Nevada,
wow, Nevada,
Pennsylvania, Orlando, Jacksonville. And I'll be keeping an eye on the chat tonight.
Awesome. Welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us. Yeah. So like I said, today we're just covering like basic cast on or getting started on your socks. And then our next sessions are going to be more on the heel, turning the heel, the gusset, and then we'll finish up the last session on the toes and closing that up. So we do have a free sock pattern that we're using. It's called the Rye. What is it again, Laura? Rye.
It's called Rye by Tim Tam Knits. It is available for free on Ravelry. You can download it there, or if you go to, you know what, I will link it in the
oh yeah, we'll stick it in the chat.
Let me get it from Ravelry. It's also available on their website if Ravelry is not a great place for you, and it is free in both places.
And it's a really good one. It has nice like diagrams. It's sized from like toddler to adult, so it's a good versatile one. It's also on a worsted weight yarn, so it will go a little bit faster for us. And yeah, so without further ado, I'm going to dive in. Let's see, I'm going to.
Roxanne actually added the file to the chat, so you can download it right from there.
You can just grab it there.
And then I want to show you one more thing.
Okay.
Let me share my screen to show the colorway.
Oh yes, so we did a new colorway just for this event.
So, and it's actually so hot off the press, I don't think either Suzanne or I
we don't
have it yet. It's coming on Friday, but it is inspired by Roxanne's new French Bulldog. Oh, my computer's going to be slow tonight, but let's go to the and it is a beautiful brown and black colorway. It is inspired by Xena. We get a few little shots of Xena, and it is available either on Serenity Worsted, which is our merino cashmere silk, or it is available on our Nightshade Worsted, which is a superwash merino. And you can see that's got the marl in it. The one ply is black, and so it doesn't take the dye the same way the others. So The sock for most sizes can be done in a single skein, but there are several sizes that do require a second skein. So at least right now it's available in 1 or 2 skeins. It's on sale for a little bit, and they will get that yarn out to you right away. So by the time you catch up with us next week, we'll be using that, but this week we'll be demonstrating on some other yarn. Okay, so I'm just going to stop sharing the screen now.
And Laura is going to give away 2 $20 gift certificates.
Oh, so if you want to buy, yes, if you want to buy some tonight,
yes,
you can.
Cool. So stay tuned, keep your chat open, and we're going to ask questions and get the answers to give those out. So, all right, but oh gosh, I still see we have a few more coming in. So,
yep, I'm working on it.
Started. Remember, this is recorded, so even if I feel, if you feel like I'm going a little fast, it is recorded, so you can go back and watch it. But please feel free to ask questions in the chat, and we'll try to stop and get those answered along the way too. All right, so now I'm going to share my screen, and oops. And I'm just going to first do a little bit of sock anatomy. So this might be a little bit of review, but I think it's good for everybody just to kind of see, what we're talking about with socks. So basics of socks. So these particular ones that we're working on are cuff down. So you basically, for socks, you have a tube, right? And you really kind of have 2 tubes that are at a right angle to each other. So this could be like our cuff, and then we have your foot. And then, so really it's just these 2 tubes, but the tricky part is we have to figure out how to connect them. And so after you do the cuff, then usually you do kind of a heel flap down here, and then you turn the heel. Some people kind of know that term. Everybody kind of feels like they know turning a heel. So you kind of turn so that you're knitting, the orientation of your knitting kind of turns, makes that cup. And then you have this kind of area in here where you're connecting the heel flap to the rest of the body. So you're kind of taking this tube and turning it this direction. And so this area in here is called the gusset. And that's kind of, this is where your ankle sits, and here's like your instep there. And then you go into the rest of your foot, however long your foot is, and then you do your toes somehow. So that's just like kind of the basic anatomy of the sock. You also, it's very common to do toe up socks. And in that case, you would start with the toe, usually with some kind of provisional, like Judy's Magic Cast On, that's what it is, right? That's like the kind of a neat way to do toe up socks. And then you start immediately knitting in the round and increasing on the sides of the toes. And then you do kind of this whole thing in reverse. So you still have, you still like turn the heel, you still work a gusset, and then you end by going up into your other tube here. So that's just, a little bit of sock anatomy. But also tonight, I'm going to show you there's so many different ways to knit a tube. And there's also other socks constructions, I guess I should mention. You can knit socks flat. People do that and then they seam them. But then you have a seam, which a lot of times for socks maybe isn't quite as good. There's also a way of doing, basically you make a tube here. So you're knitting in the round, you make this tube, and then you either knit with waste yarn for a portion of the sock, and then you keep going with your tube this way. Basically, you just have a hole. Actually, here, I'll draw it more like this. So you're going down and then you have a hole somewhere, but then your tube keeps continuing. So you like have this hole in your tube, and then you go back later and you put in a heel. So you would like pick up stitches around this hole that you left. And those are called afterthought heels and toes. And then you do your toe down here. And oftentimes you'll see those where the whole body of the sock is one color, but the heel and the toe are a different color. So that's how they do that kind of construction. Or you could like make yoga socks, and then you wouldn't even have to go back and put the heel or the toes in. But anyway, so many different ways. I've even made socks where I started at the heel. I actually started with like a heel or a round kind of circle motif and knit out from there, and then joined around the gusset and went up for the up for the top part and then out for the toes in other tubes. So there's tons of different ways, and that's really fun.
And some people actually make tube socks by just knitting a tube and not even putting a heel in. That's super popular, particularly if you're making like baby socks or socks for a young child.
Yeah,
where you don't necessarily need a heel that will fabric that will cup the heel.
Yes, yes. And another way to do that is sometimes they knit that tube kind of in a spiral. And that kind of helps it like twist around your heel a little bit more. But yeah, then you still, I think with those kind of socks in an adult, you get a little bit of bulkiness around here.
Yeah, I wouldn't recommend it for an adult. I've mostly seen it done in small children.
Yes. So, but anyway, so many different, I love that. I love all the different constructions. So it's just really fun.
Yeah, you've seen us in our cast-ons and cast-offs. You'll find just as many different methods of doing heels and toes. I mean, we'll focus on the one that's in rye, which is a good basic primer, but you will find hundreds of different heels and toes.
Yes. So that's what I'm going to focus on today is, how do we knit in the round, basically. So there's different methods. Probably the most common is double pointed needles. So I'll show you how to cast on and do things on double pointed needles. And Laura can show us a pair of her socks that she's got in progress on double points. Normally people use 5 double points or 3, 5 or 4. So you either have 4 needles. I'm going to draw these needles here. Oh, it's not the best picture, but you can get the idea. So you'd have 4 needles and your stitches are on all of these 4 needles spread out to kind of make that circle. And when you knit, you have your 5th needle and you would use your 5th needle to knit across this needle. Then this needle becomes free. And then you knit across this one and you rotate. So basically you always you have one free needle that you get started with. And then knit around, and I'll show you that when I on the next next when I show you. But the another method is one method is you can use they make these tiny needles. These ones happen to be chow glue needles, but they're just really tiny. I find that my hands must be too big or something. It's hard for me to knit like in tiny fashion. So I've tried them a lot and they're just not my preferred method. I much prefer Magic Loop. So in Magic Loop, what happens is you have your circle again, but your stitches are kind of divided in half. So you have these stitches that sit on part of the needle, and then you have like a loop of your cable that comes out, and then these half of the stitches get worked. And like your needles would come out here. So I don't know, these are your needles. And I will show you that. So that's Magic Loop is another great method to work, to work in the round. So I'll show you that, but I'm also going to show you tonight how to knit socks, or how to get started with socks 2 at a time, which is really fun. And basically with 2 at a time socks, you kind of have one sock sitting here, and you have a really long cable. So another one of your socks is like sitting on this cable out here. And you kind of knit this sock, and then you knit this sock, and you do like, you have to, use one tail of your yarn to knit this one, and then you would pick up a different yarn to work the other sock.
We have a couple things. One, Kim says she's used 2 circulars instead of Magic Loop. That works really well.
Yep.
So you can knit a sock with 2 circulars, and rather than doing Magic Loop, you will have 1 circular on one half of the sock and 1 circular on the other half of the sock.
So
the only thing that's important to note when you do that is that you keep you don't continue going with one needle onto the other. You have to sort of keep the needles separate, or else you end up with all your stitches on one needle, which you can fix. You can take them back off. It's pretty easy, but you just have to remember. And usually you would use a slightly longer cable for magic loop, but you could use 2 short needles for doing 2 circs on one sock.
And if you have a pair of interchangeable needles, a lot of times people will put like the size needle that they're using on one end. That it happens that one needle is the one that you're always like forming the stitches with. And then on the other end of the needle, you could have a smaller needle, and that would help like kind of keep you straight. So here's my like sock that I would do on double points. So like this half of the sock would be on this needle, this cable needle, and this half of the sock would be on this cable needle. And so these needles here would always be used to work on this one, and these would always be used to work on the other one.
Okay, next question. How do you start on DPN but then move on to circulars? The answer is that if you start on DPNs, you can then start with a magic loop. You can start with a longer circular, and you can knit the first 2 needles. If you're using 4 needles around the sock, you knit the first 2 needles onto your long circular, and then you pull the loop in between to create that magic loop, and then you knit the other 2.
Yep. And I'll show you how to do that. I'm going to show you in the second half here. Actually, we're kind of running out of time, but let's break. We're going to do the giveaways, and then I will show you the double points magic loop and 2 at a time magic loop. Oh, there's one more way I forgot. You can also do this really crazy thing where you're knitting like a sock inside of a sock. And that's more of a technique where you have to use, it's like you would be double knitting, and you have to have 2 strands of yarn. So you use 1 strand of yarn and you're like knitting all the stitches, but then every other stitch on your needle is the other sock. And you're usually
we have a couple more questions. I'm going to run through these really fast. Barbara, how do you prevent ladders with magic loop? What you need to do?
I'll show you a trick for that. So let's hold off on that
we'll do that. What is the advantage of doing magic loop? To me, it's that all your stitches are on 1 needle. And if you want to do 2 at a time on magic loop, it's that you'll get both. They'll be a little slow, but both your socks will be done at once. I'll tell you, I have done all the ways, and I actually prefer DPNs, because magic loop for me means you're spending a lot of time reorganizing where the needles are, whereas with DPNs, you can just keep going in a circle. But that is not to poo-poo anyone who wants to do magic loop either.
Right. And I'll tell you, my preferred is magic loop. One, because I just have those needles more available. I kind of made sure I just have all of the sizes, and then you can use magic loop for everything. You don't have to have a different size needle to make a shawl or to make a sock or to make this. If you have that, needle size, then a 40-inch cable, it's great for everything. And I don't drop it. So my problem is when I have 5 needles and I'm like knitting in the car, I inevitably drop a double pointed needle, and at least with magic loop, then I don't lose them. So
well, and I will say, you should knit what is most comfortable for you. Every knitter wants something different, and sock patterns can be knit on any number of needles.
Yes.
The final question was, do you recommend the Flexi flips? Addy Flexi flips are kind of a cross between DPNs and circulars in that they have a little cable in between them. I will tell you, I have lots of friends who absolutely love them. I found that I got ladders with them. So I would say if it's something you want to try, go for it. If you prefer DP, the one thing I did really like about the Flexi flips is when you're adding stitches at the gusset, you can put a lot of stitches on the needle. And so it does hold.
One of the advantages maybe with the Flexi flips too is that you could get away more with using just 3 needles to make your circle instead of 4.
And I have a pair of Flexi flips, so I will grab them in just a second, and I'll bring them back for the second half.
Okay.
So
we're already way out on time.
Let's do gift certificates. So open your chat. And we actually don't have a ton that we've talked about so far. So what I will say is, tell me, there are multiple correct answers, but tell me, give me a way that you can knit socks. Where would you start?
Oh, where you can start your socks, yes.
Okay, number one, hang on. Whoop. I'm going to take number one this time, and it looks like our first one was Ann Ladden, who said cuff. That's right, you can start at the cuff, or you can start at the toe, or there are some inventive ones. Ann, go ahead and message Zen Yarn Garden on here, let them know your email address, and they will get you a $20 gift card, which can be used for anything on the site. Okay. Yeah. We also talked about methods of needles. Give me one way that you can knit socks on needles. Okay, Sharon, you got it. You said DPNs. So Sharon, go ahead and message Roxanne. We will do more of these each week. I'm going to turn it back over to Suzanne so she can start to show you some cast-ons, and I will pull out my Flexi flips.
Yes. All right. So, gosh, I think we underestimate, or I didn't estimate.
We can go a little longer. Right. We can't go super long, but we can go a little longer.
Yeah. Okay. We'll do a little bit. So I'm going to cast on quickly on double points, because I think the getting started is the hardest part. So and then I'll show magic loop. Maybe I'll show the transfer from double points to magic loop, and you'll get the idea that way. But I'm just going to do a long tail cast on just because it's faster. But I would highly recommend other cast-ons, and we've done other of these tutorial Tuesdays on different cast-ons. I'll show you one that I've got started here that is the sorry, I'll show you right now. It is the tubular cast-on. So I really like tubular cast-on for going into ribbing on top-down socks. So this is my tubular cast-on that I would, a real cast-on that I would do, but just for simplicity's sakes, I'm just starting any old cast-on here. All right. Now there's a couple different ways you can go about it too. Some people like to knit flat for the first maybe 2 rows. And then join in the round, and that just helps you not twist things as much. Okay, but what I did was I casted on small number of stitches here, and then we're going to transfer them over to, or we're going to move them onto the double pointed needles. So again, there's several different ways to do this. I like to cast on my stitches on one needle and then move them. You can cast on stitches on this needle and then pick up your next needle and cast on stitches like this. But I find it's just easier to see this way. So I've got mine casted on, but now I need to connect this start over to here. So you would spread your stitches out. So just gonna, since they're double points, I can put some over here. And I obviously did not cast on for a very large sock, but you will get the general idea. So I'm going to put 5 stitches on each. I might cast on some more. Okay, so normally you would maybe put another set of stitches, but 3 needles is usually enough to make a circle. So you can see now I can access the first needle, or the first stitch here that I cast on. All right, so now I have all of my stitches on 3 needles, and they can wrap around enough to reach each other, and that's what we need for starting. So whether you have 3 or 4, it doesn't matter. Sometimes your pattern will tell you, because based on where your heel and things come, it just makes it easier if they're spaced out in 3 or 4 needles. But basically then what happens is you pick up one needle and you start knitting with this needle. So now I'm going to knit across these stitches, and this needle is going to replace this needle. So I just joined in the round. This is where you can, switch this stitch and this stitch, or different ways, but otherwise you can just get started. So I'm just going to get started here in the interest of time and knit that stitch. And now you can see how it could be kind of loose. So I can pull here. So this is one way to get rid of ladders. After you knit that first stitch, then give it a little tug and stabilize it with your thumb. I also find that knitting that second stitch and then really pulling on that second stitch is what's going to get rid of your ladders. But then you work across these stitches in your pattern. So usually ribbing at the beginning, but just knit across until all of your stitches have come off. So now this needle became free. And I'm going to throw the next one so you can see. So then you just, now this becomes the needle that you use. All right, so I was going to throw this one. So again, to get rid of those ladders, I think the key is to pull after your first stitch. So a lot of times what happens is people try to pull like before they even create a stitch, and that doesn't really work very well. So what you have to do is knit that stitch and even knit the second stitch. Sorry, can you still see this? Okay, I dropped that one. Okay, so knit that second stitch. And then really tug on your yarn and pull. And I think what happens when you do it at that point is that it doesn't slide out or it doesn't get pulled as much. Okay, so then you continue knitting across. All right, and again, this one became free. So now it gets put into this other hand to get used. So, and now we're back around to the tail. So that's how you can tell when you get to your beginning of your round. But again, when you get between, to keep the ladders away, you knit the stitch and you can pull tight here, you can stabilize it with your thumb, but then really pull at your second stitch. Make sure that stitch is pulled tight, and that should help with the ladders. Same within magic loop. All right, so now I'm going to switch. Once I get back around, I'm going to switch these over to magic loop style so we can see that quickly.
And one tip I have learned is don't weave in your tail at the beginning. Right. Leave it there, because that's how you'll know where you'll start the round every time.
Yep, so that's an easy way to know, yeah, where the start of your round is.
That's just a handy tip or trick.
A handy tip, all right. Okay, so now I'm gonna go on to double points. So since we had the question about how to switch to double points, I'll just go ahead and do that now. So if you're switching over to double points, you just start knitting with your, switching over to
circulars.
Magic loop from double points. All right, so I'm back to the beginning of the round. I'm going to knit a stitch, pull tight here, and knit my second stitch and pull tight, and then move on. So I'm knitting across one needle, and then I'm going to knit half of the stitches. So I'm going to knit halfway across this second needle. I know this is a little bit awkward. If you had 4 needles, that would be easy. You just would knit across 2 needles. And then the trick with magic loop is, remember, we're going to have half the stitches kind of on one side and half the stitches on the other. So here I would actually pull this needle out and let these stitches just hang out on the cable. And then I always like to do a little loop. So I make sure I make my my needle cross itself in a loop, and then I'll continue knitting the rest of the stitches. And same thing here, to prevent ladders, you would knit this stitch, even knit the second stitch, and then make sure you kind of pull tight there and then continue. Okay, so now I've gotten rid of the second needle, and now I'll continue and knit across the rest of the way. and then I'll show you what it looks like. All right, so now we're back to my tail, which is the beginning of my round. So now I have this little loop here. So I have half of my stitches down here, half of the stitches up here. I guess I didn't split it quite evenly, but that's okay. And I have a loop of needle of my cable out on this side, and then I have like my 2 needles here. So now to continue in the round, I would turn my work around kind of and slide this needle into the stitches. That's the next ones that are ready to get worked. And then this one gets pulled out, and I make sure I form that kind of cross with my needles or with my cable, and then start going. Forming that cross helps with ladders. It helps it not split your yarn out quite as much. But also the biggest help with ladders is this pulling it tight right here on the first stitch and the second stitch. Also with Magic Loop, you're on this cable, so that automatically is a lot less, you know, I don't know, it pulls your stitches, or it allows you to pull your stitches more than you can on a solid, because this, you know, you're pulling around the smaller diameter of the cable instead of around the needle. But sorry, okay, I know I am just blabbering on. Are there questions that we should address now?
For the most part, we're okay. Janice Carroll said one of the things that you can do if you're worried about ladders, particularly on DPNs, is you can consistently move your stitches around. So for instance, you knit 1 needle stitches and then you knit another 2 stitches off the next needle and just continue to do that around. Basically that changes where you're changing needles every single time so that you don't have one consistent spot where your stitches may be loose.
Yep, that's a good tip too.
Other than that, I think we're good. We added the rye pattern again.
Okay.
I don't know if we have time to do another.
Okay, maybe we'll cut out and do, let me just talk about it really quickly. Okay. I do have it set up here. So what I've done here is I actually cast on for 2 at a time socks. So I have one long cable. I cast on my, I use the tubular method, and I just, I did the cast on, and then I worked flat for 2 rows.
Roxanne says we can have an extra 5 minutes.
5 minutes, okay, I can do this in 5 minutes. And then I did the same thing. I actually just pulled from the outside of my ball of yarn. You could split your yarn or however you want to do it, but then I cast on again here, and I knit the setup rows for the tubular cast on. So now I have two things casted on my needles, but I need to join things in the round, right? So I look at the first sock that I cast on here. My working yarn is here, which is kind of like trapped in the middle. But what I want to happen is it to be joined to the start, or sorry, the end of my round. So I want to join it like this so that I start working around this loop. So this is how you would start Magic Loop 2. So you would cast on flat, and then pinch your work. If you want, you can count to make sure you go exactly in half, and then pull your loop out. So I went to half the stitches and I pulled that loop out. Now I'm going to start working. So here's my working yarn for the first sock. And so I'm going to just start working across the stitches. So I push this needle in so that it's ready to work. And then I just take the other end of the needle and start joining in the round. So for these ones, I am ribbing. So, and then the same thing, how we transferred for Magic Loop before. when you get to the end, then you have to do the needle shuffle. But this way you're working on one sock, and what happens is you'll knit across this, and then you'll shuffle your needles, you'll knit across this, and then you'll come over here, and this one will get joined in the round. And you'll pull a loop out again over here. So then you'll have like loops out on this side and loops out here, and you'll just be working around this sock and then around this sock and then around this sock and then around this sock.
And the only thing to be careful of when you're doing 2 at a time is to make sure that you are switching yarns when you are switching between socks.
Right, don't get your socks together.
If you knit all with one yarn, you will join your socks together and they will be infinitely less useful.
Yeah.
So I know there are lots of questions. We couldn't possibly cover everything. Roxanne has added a link to our YouTube channel, which is where this video will be shortly after we're done here. It usually has to process, so give us just a little while, but it will go up there. You can ask questions in the Facebook group or email us. You can also find me, I'm on Ravelry, and if you post in the Facebook group, I'll try and keep an eye on it.
Yeah, I will also, and I'll try and yeah, maybe we can link to some other like little short videos or something. If questions come up, we can make some of those. But
yeah. We'd
really,
love to see your progress.
Yes.
Next week, it will be, the next 2 weeks will be Suzanne and Shayna, and then I will join again at the end of the month. The one thing that I did want to show you is I did grab my Flexi flips. So Flexi flips are a little like DPNs, but they have this very short cable in between, and usually they come in sets of 3. So when you get them, and I just cast on a very mini little sock here with a little bit of ribbing, and as you can see, basically I use them almost like I would use 2 at a time. It's very much a cross between DPNs and circulars. I use them a little bit like I would do 2 at a time, 1 on each side, and then I do use the 3rd needle to move around more like DPNs. My issue was that I got some ladders in between, but I did really like them for the gusset, because when you're picking up all those extra stitches, it's nice to have a cable in the middle that holds them. So, you know, it's up to you. I would say, if you plan to knit more than 1 pair of socks, and we hope you do, try all the methods, see what works for you. I have knit in all the different methods and have settled on one that I like, but that doesn't mean it has to be the one that you like.
Yes, they're all different. Right?
How do you keep track of rows for the 2 sock method?
Yeah, that, you know, it can be a hard one. What I do is I make sure that I'm always, I put like a little locking stitch marker on my first sock, say, at the beginning. Not a stitch marker on my needles, because that kind of gets messed up. But if you put a locking stitch marker actually on the sock, then you know which is your first sock, and you know when you get back to that first sock. So when I'm working with the 2 at a time, I would always make sure I, you know, to finish one row, say, is 1 round on each sock, just so you don't stop like in the middle between the 2 socks.
The other thing,
a locking stitch marker will help that.
Okay, the other thing I will tell you is if you are working on magic loop or on 2 socks on a circ, you will be knitting the heels back and forth and 1 at a time. So don't try and break your brain on that. But heels work best when you do them 1 at a time. Yeah. I mean, I guess technically you could knit across the heel flaps back and forth, but your heel turn is definitely a 1 at a time thing. So we will get to that in the next couple sessions.
Yes. So the next session is going to cover that heel flap. And I think the following one is gusset. So, and then we'll go back to the toes. So yeah, if you have questions that come up in the middle, then we can probably address those. The other thing is the reason to do 2 at a time socks is, one person asked, is, or sometimes you can just have like 2 separate socks going. And some people like to like knit the cuff of this sock and then the cuff of this sock, and then knit the heel of this one and then the heel of this one. And that works well because sometimes you're making like a tiny adjustment. And if you make a tiny adjustment to the cuff And then you make a tiny adjustment to the heel, and then you make a tiny adjustment here. When you get to that second sock, sometimes you're like, wait a second, I remember those were just tiny adjustments, but what were they? And if you do like the cuff, heel, you know, it can solve some of that issue. But Laura, do you do yours just one at a time, or how do you like yours?
I normally do mine in close enough succession that I do them one at a time, but actually I
Okay.
was thinking about picking a different method for these socks because I wasn't sure what you were going to pick or what Shana was going to pick, but if we all did something a little different, we could share photos.
Yes.
So let's coordinate and figure out how we want to do that, because I thought I might do two concurrently, because I have a bunch of DPNs. Concurrently meaning working them on separate needles, but at the same time.
Yeah, I think that would be good.
And
then
I'll
do the two at a time
each week
craziness
to show you what they would look like.
Yes.
And I will say, if you put two socks on one circular needle, it does go a lot slower. Remember, you're working both at once, so you don't have to. The other thing it will help you with is it will help you with second sock syndrome, which is when you knit the whole first sock and you're like, that's gorgeous and I don't want to do this again. But most of us do need two socks.
Yes,
so
that's what I tend to do. It's like, I figured it out and I want to move on to the next thing. So I think
and no one will know if you wear mismatched socks in the winter because they'll be under your clothes and in your shoes. So knit two different socks if you want.
There you go. Yes.
Okay, so message us if you have questions, and we'll see you next week to so cast on if you can, knit your cuff, and we'll meet next week to talk about heels and heel turns.
Yay, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much. We'll see you next week.
Ramming it in there, but hopefully you gained a little bit of something.
Good night.
Good night, thanks.